Raf Epstein on ABC Radio Melbourne.
My next guests have today been in Geelong for one of Australia's largest events for people with a disability. The Victorian Advocacy League for Individuals with Disability had a big meeting in Geelong. It was their Having a Say conference, and I guess some of their rock star guests, they had a chat with the people from the Trace podcast. You might have heard of the Trace podcast. It is about Mark and Adam James's mother, Maria James, who was murdered almost 4 decades ago in Thornbury. You might remember that it was the Trace podcast and the ABC's Rachael Brown who revealed that Maria had just discovered that Adam, her younger son, was being abused by the local priest. And Adam had also told Trace that he was abused by a second local priest. And neither of the priests, of course, were interviewed by police at the time of the murder. So they were speaking about the issues behind the podcast and the ways, hopefully, that we can allow everybody in our community to be in conversation and to have their say. So firstly, to Mark and Adam James, thanks for coming in, guys. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us in, Raf.
Thanks, Raf.
And let me ask, can I start, Adam, with
Yes.
you?
Yes.
What I want to know,
Yes.
how did you feel? Rachael Brown is here as well from the podcast, but when
Yes.
that podcast landed
Yes.
and we learnt that a new inquest would be announced,
Right.
how did you feel about that?
Raf, Raf, and I like to say, and like to say, I feel very confident that it can this far, and yes, I am. I'm very grateful so much for part of Rachael and her ABC team for everything they've done.
I'll point out to you, of course, Adam has a number of issues going on, including cerebral palsy and Tourette's, but that is all, of course, part of the reason that he wasn't spoken to when his mum was murdered and part of the reason that he was at the conference in Geelong today. Mark, what was it like for you today, sort of relaying the experience? I mean, you kind of were the rock stars at the conference. What was it like for you today?
It was quite moving, actually, just talking to those people and listening to their viewpoints, and it was an inspiration for me. They kept telling me how I was an inspiration, my brother was an inspiration for them, but in fact I was just so pleased to be there and to be able to share our experiences with them, and it was really good.
Yeah. Adam, can I also ask you,
Yes,
you've become an advocate for
yes.
VALID, the
Yes.
Victorian Advocacy League for Individuals
Yes.
with a Disability. Why did you become an advocate for them?
I was approached by one of the staff who would have done it. He asked me if I would like to be an advocate and be a team member for Bennett. So I went along to a meeting over at the Forward Hill Shopping Center, and I got involved through that.
Through that.
Yes.
Should point out to you again, Mark and Adam James are with me. They're the stars of the Trace podcast. Adam has cerebral palsy and Tourette's, which is one of the reasons he's talking in a way that you don't actually often hear people talking in that way on the radio, which is all part of why he is here and why he was part of VALID today. Rachel, can I actually ask you, I didn't plan on asking you a question, but I've got a good one. I remember speaking to you about this podcast And I guess the injustice of the lack of investigation was something that driving you to get the podcast up and running. But I suspect you were not nearly as aware that issues around disability and having a different ability were going to be at the forefront of the reasons why it wasn't investigated properly. What have you learned about it all from that point of view?
Well, two things. So Ron Iddles, who's the main detective that you hear from in Trace, says that that's one of his biggest regrets, that back then they didn't think children were important or could offer something important, I should say. And that makes him very sad now, because he's like, children can often hold the key to these things. So I think that's interesting. I think they didn't speak to the boys because they were young, and I think they also thought, well, Adam has cerebral palsy, and so that might make it more traumatic for Adam. You know, so there was probably some care in that decision as well, thinking that we won't put him through further trauma. For me, I just think, I mean, you know, Raf, we work in the media. It's all about the quick news grab. It's about the minute-and-a-half news package of a night time. Or a 3.5-minute radio current affairs package. That could not do justice to Adam's story. He needed someone who could spend a lot of time with him, and I think that's the beauty of the podcast medium, that I could sit down with him for 4 hours. And it doesn't matter that he can't get a sentence out as quickly as you or I, because he can tell his story effectively and cleverly. He just needs more time. So that was the beauty for me, that I had the luxury of time with the podcast, both to do the interview but also to let it breathe on the podcast. And I mean, that was the point about today. It's giving people a voice, and people like Adam, maybe people in the community feel like they should speak on their behalf to make it easier for Adam, whereas Trace was all about, and today, the Valid Conference. Let Adam speak for Adam. And he's been an amazing advocate for himself, for other victims of sexual abuse, to hopefully empower them that they should have a voice, can have a voice, even if it's difficult.
And Mark, I wanted to get an update for everyone. This audience has been following the Trace podcast. They've been hearing Rachael reveal all of the news breaks with John Fain. We're at, a point where there's going to be another investigation. How are you feeling about it all?
I'm feeling both elated and relieved. What we've been after from the very beginning has been, a fresh and objective look at what's happened, including potential involvement of those two priests, including the evidence bungle-ups with missing documents and DNA stuff-ups and all this type of thing. And I'm just so grateful to the ABC Trace team. I'm personally touched by the community support, and very, very happy to see that what's going to come out of this is a new inquest with a fresh and objective look at this case.
A big thank you to Mark and Adam James, who are, of course, at the centre of the Trace podcast. If you haven't listened, you should. To Rachael Brown as well. And it was the Victorian Advocacy League for Individuals with Disability. It was there having a say conference that my three guests were the rock stars in conversation.